This video was requested by a patron. Patrons in the top tier not only get early access to videos, but get the ability to request future video topics for me to cover. To become a patron, click the card in the upper right corner or the link in the description. And now, on with our feature presentation. April 6, 2001. It's the home opener for the Philadelphia Phillies of Major League Baseball, as they're taking on the Chicago Cubs in this National League battle. For the purposes of our story, even though the Cubs won 3-2, giving the Phillies their first loss of the season after an opening series sweep, that does not matter. What does matter is the field surface that the Phillies are playing on. Because after years of having the worst surface in all of sports, and a surface that was outright dangerous for players to play on, this stadium looks somewhat better. Obviously, it wasn't great. At the end of the day, turf is still turf. But after years of playing on AstroTurf, with the stadium widely regarded as having the worst turf in sports, which was so dangerous that in 2023, it was discovered that the turf directly caused cancer in 6 Phillies players, the Phillies were playing on a brand new and much safer surface called NextTurf. And for a brief moment in time, it seemed as though all of the problems with the surface were fixed. Through the first half of the season, for the first time in ages, a poor surface was not the subject of any controversy with the Philadelphia Phillies. In fact, Ruben Amaro Jr., the assistant general manager of baseball operations for the Phillies, wrote on NextTurf and its benefits, "Up until this stage in the season, our trainers have not treated any player as a result of our players having any type of injury or ailment due to the new surface." Marlins left fielder Cliff Floyd commented positively on the turf, saying, "It's pretty good stuff. It's a lot easier on the back. It should help anybody who has a back problem." Future Hall of Fame player and Philadelphia Phillies legend Scott Rowland said, "I don't really see what the comparison to AstroTurf would be. It's soft enough, and it's not a springy soft. This is a huge step in a positive direction." In other words, this looked like $1.8 million well spent in the offseason, since the surface was less likely to cause rug burn and handled rain significantly better. Granted, that's not to say that NextTurf was necessarily the best option, as one of the main reasons for choosing this turf over AstroTurf, and choosing it really over grass, was because it allowed for the quickest conversion for football to baseball, and vice versa. However, everyone seemed to be pretty optimistic about NextTurf, even if the company installing it was Southwest Recreational Industries, as in, the same company that was responsible for the current AstroTurf that was absolutely terrible. Said Richard Tudston, the director of the City Capital Programs Office, "I think this is great news for Veterans Stadium. I think both the Eagles and the Phillies are happy with this selection, and we're happy about it. There were a lot of tests done on the major products available, and this one best resembles a natural grass surface." And Amaro Jr. said on this, "This is a definite upgrade. This new surface is a quality surface that will give both the baseball and football players a lot more cushion." In fact, this was such an upgrade that one writer said that when the Phillies put pieces of the new turf and the old turf side by side to demonstrate to people what this surface would be like, that when someone put a sign behind the AstroTurf that said old turf and a sign behind the NextTurf that said new turf, he wrote, "as if it were necessary to put those signs there." It was sort of like putting a carrot next to a banana split and identifying them as non-fattening and fattening. Some things just do not need further description. The NextTurf, with the synthetic blades emanating from its base, is emerald green and soft, and almost looks like the real thing. The old stuff is more the color of pea soup, and has the texture of a batch of brownies left in the oven an hour too long. Which raises the question, the surface was working great for baseball. It seemed like Veterans Stadium finally had a surface that was, at the very least, serviceable. No one would mistake it for being great, but it's like going to a 1986 Hyundai Excel after you were driving a Ford Pinto. Still not an ideal option, and still pretty ugly, but at least this one won't kill you. So how would it work for football? Well,
game has been officially canceled because of turf that was unplayable.
Oh boy. It needs to be said that as bad as the old AstroTurf was for Veterans Stadium for baseball, and trust me, it was bad, seeing as people literally got cancer from its surface, it was a million times worse for football. If you want a really easy way for a player in his prime to have his career come to a screeching halt, you had him playing against the Eagles on the AstroTurf. In fact, I've already done a video about just how bad the AstroTurf was, because it literally caused Trent Green, during one game, to be sacked. You can learn more about how Green got sacked by the turf by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And it wasn't just one Green sack that caused the turf to have its reputation as the worst playing surface in the league. Bears wide receiver Wendell Davis was 2 years removed from a season where he had just under 1,000 yards receiving, and was a stud wideout for the team. In 1993, when his Bears played the Eagles, he blew out both of his knees because there was a gap in the field at the seam. His feet caught it, and his kneecaps were pushed all the way to his thighs, spending several months in a wheelchair as a result. His knees were blown out. That was the last game he ever played in the regular season for any team. Dallas Cowboys wide receiver Michael Irvin was coming off of a 1998 season where he had over 1,000 yards receiving. It seemed like nothing was going to stop him whatsoever from reaching 12,000 career yards, becoming one of just a handful of players in league history at the time to accomplish this feat. And then, in a game on the Veterans Stadium turf, just 96 yards away from that coveted mark that only 8 men before him had reached, his helmet collided hard on the turf. Just like that, he had a spinal injury and had to be carted off the field. He never played another game ever again. Chicago Bears quarterback Cade McNown was 1 year removed from being a first-round pick by the Chicago Bears. Then, the Bears played the Eagles on the Veterans Stadium turf, and after being driven hard into the turf, which McNown would later describe as like being driven into concrete, he separated his shoulder. He would never play another down in the NFL after the 2000 season. And later that same year, not one, but 2 players on the Cowboys suffered injuries at the hands of the turf, with wide receiver Rocket Ismail, who had back-to-back seasons of over 1,000 yards entering this year, tearing his right knee and missing the rest of the season, and safety George Teague, who started every game for the Cowboys up until that point, breaking his foot and missing the rest of the season. After that game, Cowboys quarterback Randall Cunningham, who was a former Eagle, said on the surface, "It's a lot harder than I remember. I touched my knee on the ground and thought I was going to lose a ligament." And Cowboys running back Emmitt Smith said on the surface, "It's by far the worst field in the National Football League. This field is worse than mud. When you play on a surface as hard as that, it can contribute to injuries. It needs to be ripped up." So to say that a new surface for the Eagles and Veterans Stadium was long overdue would be putting it lightly. The AstroTurf carpet that had ruined the career of so many athletes before had to go. And it seemed like next turf, which you're looking at right now, if you couldn't go with a natural grass surface because of the multi-purpose nature of the stadium, and because you needed to make the conversion from baseball to football and vice versa quickly and easily, was a better alternative. Although, let's be honest, as Emmitt Smith said, playing in a mud pit would be a better alternative. It's not exactly a high bar. In fact, next turf was so highly praised based on how the Phillies season was going that over at the University of Wisconsin at Camp Randall Stadium, they were going to install the surface there and pay the $500,000 to change their field. Said Al Fish, the associate athletic director in charge of capital projects for the university, "You could fall to your hands and knees from a standing position, and it's going to feel like soft grass in a park." And even though the Eagles had yet to actually play a game on the turf, everyone was pretty optimistic that this was going to work out, especially since next turf had been used for other venues before. The Atlanta Falcons practiced on next turf. Austin Stadium, which is where the University of Oregon plays its football games, used next turf. And PGE Park in Portland, which was the home of the Portland Beavers in the Pacific Coast League, a AAA baseball league, and the Portland Timbers of the A-League, a minor soccer league before the Timbers eventually made the jump to MLS in 2011, all used the turf. Said Jim Sema, the director of new stadium development for the Eagles, "We evaluated a number of new surfaces, 4 synthetic and 1 natural, and next turf was the surface that met all the requirements regarding safety and traction. All things we should be interested in." Yeah, about that with the whole safety and traction thing. The good news was that on August 13th, 2001, when the Baltimore Ravens were set to play the Philadelphia Eagles in the very first football game ever at Veterans Stadium over on the next turf, no one got injured. The turf did not cause anyone to go down and miss the season, a la what happened with Wendell Davis, Michael Irvin, or anyone else. However, the reason for that? That's because this field was so unsafe, so dangerous, and so not fit for football that the game was not even played. Can't have anyone getting injured if you can't even play the game, I guess.
Field of Screams. The headline writers are going to have a field day with this, no pun intended. This past January, the playing surface at Veterans Stadium was voted the worst in a survey conducted by the NFL Players Association. The Vet lived up or lived down to its billing tonight as the preseason opener for the Eagles and Ravens was set to unfold but was postponed.
So what exactly happened? Why couldn't we see the 2 bird teams, one of which made the playoffs and the other of which won the Super Bowl, face off in this opening exhibition game? Well, you might be thinking that the stadium officials were ill-prepared to make the conversion from baseball to football, and maybe they had never done it before. However, that wasn't even true. According to Joe Martz, the managing director for Philadelphia, while the Phillies were on the road at one point in July and not using the stadium, city groundskeepers spent 3 whole days doing nothing but practicing the conversion from baseball to football. And according to him, everything went smoothly. It went off without a hitch. But that was in good weather. The problem with this conversion was that over the weekend, since this game was played on a Monday, there was a ton of rain. Lots and lots of water, with torrential downpours, hit the area. And while the grounds crew had practiced the conversion many times over those 3 days in good weather, they had never practiced it under real-life game conditions in bad weather. And the NFL knew when they visited the field on the Sunday night that there might be a problem because of this, as officials visited the field the night before the game and said that there were problems with the field. To which, I guess, Philly officials supposedly fixed the issue and said that everything was taken care of. However, that clearly was not the case, especially since Eagles officials tried to get a tarp put on the surface, and they were not allowed to do so, which might have made the issue better. With this conversion, there were 3 different parties responsible. The Phillies were responsible for smoothing the dirt on the cutout sites, covering up the areas of the infield. Next Turf was in charge of laying the turf, and the city was in charge of painting the lines on the field. And while all 3 of those parties insisted that there were no issues whatsoever with the turf, obviously, there were some major issues. And the issues started as soon as the players arrived at 5:30, 2 hours before kickoff, when the players remarked that something was off, and that the surface was inconsistent. 30 minutes later, Ravens head coach Brian Billick walked on the field and bluntly said that his team was not going to play on the field unless the conditions were fixed. because he wasn't going to put his team in jeopardy like that. And while the grounds crew tried to fix the issue, smoothing and solidifying the area under the cutouts of the turf, it was no use. What was supposed to be a 7:35 start time got pushed back to 8:05, and that was on the optimistic end. Even though the teams tried to warm up at 7 o'clock, the field was no better. Eagles kicker David Akers said that the field was so uneven that he would need multiple cleats, saying, "I need a molded cleat for the shaggy stuff and a wet weather shoe for the rest of it." Always a good sign when on the same field you have to change shoes based on where you are because it's that uneven. And when Troy Vincent on the Eagles and Tony Siragusa on the Ravens met with each other after warm-ups, since they were the team representatives from the Players Union, they agreed that they were not going to play the game. By 8 o'clock, the game, which was supposed to kick off, was all but called off, with the Ravens equipment crew emptying the water coolers and packing everything up. Finally, at 8:09, the game was suspended, with the game getting called off for good at 8:24. Unsurprisingly, fans did not exactly take the news well, seeing as they spent money and wasted tons of time to go to a game that never happened, with beer bottles being thrown onto the field and with 6 fans getting arrested for smashing the ticket booths after the announcement was made. It was just an utter embarrassment all the way around that ended up costing the Eagles anywhere in the ballpark of 8 figures of revenue. And the crazy part is that no one could identify the specific problem. All of these people in charge, and no one knew what the real issue was. Said Southwest Recreational Executive Vice President Bob Allison, which was the company that made and installed the turf, "It's smooth. It's a smooth, playable surface. Workers opened it up and found some small deviations in the clay. The clay was removed, put back in, and leveled up, just like they played on for years." And Joe Martz, the managing director for the city, said the best thing to do is to get some professionals in here to tell us what went wrong. Again, always a good sign when no one knows what went wrong. But everyone on the Ravens and the Eagles seemingly agreed. The game could not be played under these conditions, and it was an embarrassment to the entire city that this was an issue. Said Joe Banner, the president of the Eagles, "We've been going through this for years. It's not acceptable. The conditions this team is forced to play in is absolutely unacceptable and an embarrassment to the city of Philadelphia." It was completely unanimous from everybody's perspective. The field is not suitable to playing. The surface underneath the turf was not smoothed properly, so that when you lay the turf on it, you've got not a ripple, but ruts to the point where it was unsafe. You could twist an ankle or a knee too easily. David Modell, the president of the Ravens, said on this, "The risk to the players was too great, and it really is a shame." Ravens head coach Brian Billick commented on the decision by saying, "The most important thing to note is the safety and well-being of the players will be the number one determinant in everything we do." And Eagles quarterback Troy Vincent said, "The players were disappointed we weren't able to play, but the field conditions were horrendous, with players actually sinking into the turf at certain areas on the field." Tony Siragusa, the Ravens defensive tackle, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, echoed the statements made by Vincent, and said on this, "It just wasn't in the best interest for the players, and we collectively decided not to play this game. I think the right decision was made to cancel the game, but I feel sorry for the fans. It is a shame for the fans not to see us be able to perform. The safety of the players is the main issue." Now, there were some talks about postponing the game to a different date, but because this was just a preseason game, and because there was no room in the schedule with how crowded it was, especially since this game was taking place on a Monday night, the NFL just decided to outright cancel the game. Plus, who knew if the field would even be in good condition when they postponed it? As John McGrath, The executive of the union in charge of installing the next turf said on this, "No matter how much dirt they put in there, you still have the depressions." And Eagles head coach Andy Reid was absolutely livid about this entire thing, putting everyone on blast for how this embarrassment played out. Take a listen.
From my standpoint, I'm embarrassed for putting Brian and the Ravens through the travel here, my players. This is a very emotional game, and the players were looking forward to playing in this game, and they prepared themselves both mentally and physically to do that. And even though it's a game, we take this thing very serious, and I'm disappointed that the people that prepared the surface did not take it into their hands and prepare themselves as diligent. And I think we all have jobs to do, and I've said this before, I'm a firm believer that we all do our jobs to the best of our abilities, and I don't feel that happened. Again, this was a joint action that took place between both teams, their officials, the coaches, and the player reps, and inevitably it was decided by the league. But again, I'm disappointed in the situation.
Now, I should note that this was not the first time in NFL history that a preseason game got canceled because of poor field conditions. We saw this happen in 1995 at the Astrodome between the Houston Oilers and the San Diego Chargers. Nor would it be the last time that a game got canceled because of these conditions, as we saw take place in 2016 up in Canton, Ohio at the Hall of Fame game between the Green Bay Packers and the Indianapolis Colts. So this wasn't unprecedented by any means. It wasn't the first time that it happened, nor would it be the last. But still, it doesn't make this whole incident any less embarrassing. The 2001 season for the Eagles actually turned out to be a pretty good one. They won the NFC East for the first time since 1988. They went 11-5, which was tied for their best record in the last 2 decades, and they made it all the way to the NFC Championship before losing to the St. Louis Rams, making this the first time since 1980 that the team advanced to the conference championship. But it definitely got off to a poor and rocky start, to say the least. Because even when the Veterans Stadium turf was supposedly better than it used to be, at the end of the day, it was like putting lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig, and it's still Veterans Stadium turf. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.